The observation deck of Station Valuan 7 smelled like recycled air, nutrient paste, and the faint musk of something wild. Cadet first-year Divan Soul noticed the smell before he noticed anything else. He had grown up on a colony world where the apex predators were no larger than a house cat, soft things with blunt claws and nervous eyes. Here, standing at the entrance to the Federation Interspecies Exchange Ward, he understood for the first time that the universe had never promised him safety. It had only promised him the illusion of it. "Don't touch the divider glass," said Instructor Peleth, a lean Corvinide with iridescent scales and a career full of hard lessons. "And do not, under any circumstances, make eye contact with the Thyrac juvenile." 7 cadets in total. They pressed against the far wall like magnets repelled by the enclosure ahead of them. Inside it, Kale Vera. The cub was barely 8 months old by Thyrac reckoning, roughly equivalent to 4 human years, the briefing had said, though the briefing had also noted that Thyrac predator cubs at 4 human years could dislocate a steel door from its frame by accident. Kale paced the enclosure with that particular rhythm of young things that have never been told no by the universe, casual, curious, entirely unconcerned with being watched. He was roughly the size of a large bear. His coat was deep amber black, patterned with the broken stripes of his species, and his paws, each one the size of a dinner plate, made almost no sound on the padded floor. His ears, tall and tufted, swiveled independently. His eyes, when they caught the light, were a pale gold that seemed to glow from somewhere behind the iris. Divan Soul felt his knees want to become separate from his body entirely. "Where," whispered Cadet Yemina Cho beside him, "is the human?" Mara Ellison was on her hands and knees in the enclosure, retrieving an enrichment toy that had been batted under the feeding platform for the 3rd time that afternoon. She was 31 years old, 5'6" in her boots, with brown hair pulled back in a braid that had suffered considerably since morning. She wore the gray-green uniform of a Federation xenobiology caretaker, though the right sleeve had a fresh claw snag in it and her collar was damp where Kale had apparently decided her neck was a viable chew surface approximately 20 minutes ago. She found the toy, a dense polymer sphere threaded with scent pockets, and straightened up, brushing her knees off. "Got it," she announced. Kale Vera's head swung toward her with the immediate, laser-locked attention of a predator who had spotted movement. His ears went flat. His tail went still. His hindquarters dropped into a crouch. The cadets on the other side of the glass watched this sequence with the collective horror of people watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. "She's going to," Yemina started. Kale pounced. He crossed the distance in a single bound, all 260 kilograms of juvenile Thyrac landing with a concussive thump against the floor right in front of Mara. He reared up, planted both forepaws on her shoulders, and let out a sound that was somewhere between a roar and a bark, a sharp, percussive growth that rattled the observation glass and sent every cadet stumbling backward. It was a play growl. Mara knew that. The cadets did not know that. What they saw was a child-sized apex predator putting its full weight on a human woman and screaming at her face. What Mara Ellison did was plant her feet, grip Kale's forepaws so she didn't topple over, and growled back. Not a human approximation of a growl. Not a nervous squeak dressed up as bravado. A full, chest-deep, rumbling growth that came from somewhere Divan Soul could not identify as possible in a creature that size, delivered directly into the face of a Thyrac juvenile from approximately 4 inches away. There was a half-second of total silence. Then Mara laughed. It was a big, genuine laugh, the kind that involved her whole face and made her grab Kale's wrist for balance, and she shook one of his forepaws the way you'd shake a friend's hand after a terrible joke landed, and said, "You absolute menace." Kale made a chirping sound, dropped back to all fours, and immediately began trying to chew on her braid. Instructor Peleth cleared his throat. 7 cadets stood in a row, every one of them in various stages of having stopped breathing. "The human caretaker," Peleth said, with the careful tone of someone reading from a cultural manual they still found deeply confusing, uses vocal and postural mimicry to engage the juvenile on its own terms. This is a documented human behavior. It is considered, he checked his notes, fun. Fun, repeated Cadet Soul. For the human, Peleth confirmed. Inside the enclosure, Mara had given up on the braid and was now attempting to coax Kale into a grooming session with a specialized brush, which he was tolerating with the theatrical exhaustion of a creature who found grooming boring but also very much wanted to be touched. He kept making small huffing sounds and pressing his enormous head into her side hard enough that she had to widen her stance to absorb the impact. She's not scared at all, Yemena said, not as an accusation, more as a report from a scout who had returned with information they didn't fully understand. No, said Peleth. Caretaker Ellison has worked with Thyrak for 11 years. She speaks approximately 40% of their juvenile play dialect. He paused. She was also, I am told, raised in proximity to large predator fauna on her homeworld. This appears to have given her a different relationship with fear. Different how? Asked another cadet. Peleth considered the question seriously. Humans appear to have a fear response that, under certain conditions, converts to something else. Something that functions similarly to interest. He said the word interest the way you might say antimatter, with the caution of a person holding something they don't fully understand the physics of. On the other side of the glass, Mara had settled cross-legged on the floor. Kale, having decided that sitting was acceptable, had arranged himself with his head in her lap, which meant approximately 40 kilograms of skull and jaw were resting on her thighs. She was working the brush through the longer fur behind his ears, the spot, she had learned at considerable personal cost during his first week, that made him go boneless with pleasure. He was making a sound now that wasn't quite a purr. Thyrak didn't purr, physiologically, but that occupied the same emotional space. A deep, rhythmic vibration that Mara felt more in her chest than heard with her ears. She'd done this job long enough to know what people saw when they watched her. She'd read her own incident reports. Subject engaged juvenile in high-risk proximity contact. Subject employed provocation mirroring technique without apparent distress. She'd laughed at that one. Without apparent distress. As if she'd been pretending. She hadn't been pretending. She'd been having a good time. Kale opened one golden eye and looked up at her. Don't start, she told him. You're the one who growled first. He made a sound like a very low, very brief thunderstorm. Yeah, she said, scratching behind his ear. That's what I thought. Instructor Peleth was answering questions, a wall of them, because cadets who had survived a scare tended to want to understand it immediately, as a survival mechanism. How does she know when it's play? Body language, secondary vocalizations, the angle of the tail. What if she's wrong? She hasn't been. She also accepts that as a statistical category, not a guarantee. Has she ever been hurt? 3 times, all accidents, none serious. Kale had cried afterward. The Thyrak term for the sound he made translates roughly to I have done a terrible thing and I am inconsolable. Why does she growl back? Peleth paused at that one. I asked her, he said finally. She said that when something growls at you, the most honest thing you can do is growl back. She said it tells the truth about the relationship. He folded his notes. She said, another pause, reading, you can't build trust with something if you're pretending you're not the same kind of person it is. Silence. Divan Soul looked through the glass at the woman sitting quietly on the floor of an enclosure designed for apex predators, with one of those predators asleep in her lap, and felt something shift somewhere behind his sternum. Not fear exactly. Something that was starting to convert into something else. Something that functioned, he suspected, quite a lot like interest. Later, walking out, Yemena caught his arm. She waved at us, she said. Through the glass. On the way out. Did you see? He had. Mara Ellison had glanced toward the observation deck, seen 7 cadets worth of stunned faces, and given them a small, cheerful wave, the kind you'd give to neighbors across a fence. From inside an apex predator enclosure. with a juvenile Fyrak using her shoulder as a chin rest. Yeah, Divan said. Humans, Yemena said, with something that was not quite reverence and not quite bafflement but lived in the space between them. He nodded. Humans, he agreed.